Stacca questo.
Vai, vai, vai. Ora
Colomba, ci sei?
sì.
Sente ora?
Solo ci senti adesso? Scrivimi se sì. Ora sì. Perfetto.
Ok. Registrare, stiamo registrando.
There are students on distance as well. Yes? How many? How many students are on distance?
No, no parlo.
Okay.
Okay, let's restart. Thank you. Let's restart the lecture of this afternoon. This afternoon we have Dr. Stef Stiestra. He's a colonel from the Royal Dutch Navy Reserve. He is an expert in biological emergency and medical management. Everywhere you have or you had in the past a biological CBRN problem, Steph was there trying to solve the problem, and he always did it. So he will transfer to you as much as he can in 4 hours his experience over the year. Steph, thank you for being with us since the beginning of this course now. So you are one of the long-standing lecturers that we have.
Insisting that biologics is important. Some people think only radiological or chemical, but biological
is the most important.
Estimate.
Thank you so much, Olivier.
Okay, you're leaving now?
I have, yes. I did not stay in class during the talk.
Okay. Well, welcome. Indeed, I'm a CBRN specialist for the Dutch Armed Forces and subject matter expert for about 14 years. My background is I'm a medical doctor and biochemist, and so one of the pioneers in life sciences, and one is the aspects of the bioscience is the interaction of chemicals and I hope with other elements of life. And that's what I will discuss with you there this afternoon. I got a lot of freedom. I see I have a very big group. Normally I do also an exercise at the end where you have separate groups and you have to do a case yourself. Unfortunately, I think I cannot manage in the time frame I have now to do this workshop or this task for you to solve a problem at this moment, because the time for the interaction afterwards, which is even more important because there you learned, is not enough. So please announce to the course management that you would like to have this workshop as well. Well, I start with some work about what is happening in bio at this moment, what is the threat, and where we are with the bio threats. CBRN is a big issue, starting with radiological Dutch bomb scenarios. I think this is a serious one, which you also should not underestimate, because it's not directly deadly, it causes cancer. But you have a no-go area for a long time, and that makes disruption in your society. For that reason, Dutch bomb scenarios have to be taken very serious. Nuclear weapons, I'm less concerned about, although there are some nuclear powers who are getting more aggressive nowadays. But then you have a fatalistic issue where the radiological aspects afterwards in the region is more of importance, and then you have to do the bomb scenario again. A nuclear accident can happen, but also there you have the radiological aspects. Chemical, we have the classic chemical warfare agents, and other chemical accidents can happen with these agents. But the technical industrial chemicals are even more important. The first chemical weapons were also designed because it was left over in the industry of some chemicals, and which were absolutely useful to make self-combustion. So that is just because of that time frame, the chemical warfare agents were developed and became rather stated at the OPCW, which you will visit in October, as a chemical warfare agent. But there are far more toxic industrial chemicals. What we will discuss now this afternoon is biological warfare agents as the known warfare agents, but also, and I think this is more important, with pandemics and new emerging diseases. And within these new emerging diseases, you have both normal diseases, which hadn't changed due to evolution, due to nature, but you can also have man-made. And that is something which I really take serious and will discuss more in depth with you. Because we have to remember that when we are looking at these chemical and biological compounds, the most toxic ones are biological toxins. So nature invents the better killing materials, the better toxins. And then you say, botulinum, that's toxic. And my sister is using it for removing the wrinkles. Yes, at a very low concentration and a specific part of toxin, but indeed it kills the end of your nerves. And that is the effect. With a higher concentration, kill you completely, killing your nerves is something what is done with these Botox injections. And then you get that baby face, and some people like it. I do not like it because when you have baby, you have whisper. And using these biologics is already forbidden for a long time in multilateral treaties. It was already in 100 years ago, the Geneva Protocol, that the toxins derived from microorganisms like botulinum were forbidden. And this is reinforced again in the Biological Toxin and a Biological and Toxic Weapon Convention in 1972. I think another course in this curriculum, you have already got all the legal aspects of the biological and chemical treaties, isn't it? Otherwise, you will get it later. But remember, there is a biological treaty, but still there's a risk. And of course, the biggest risk is the natural outbreak. Nature happens to be the biggest terrorist in this, and Ebola outbreak in about 10 years ago now is one of those examples. Of course, you can also have an accidental release of biological dangerous materials. And this is an accident which happened in Sverdlovsk in the former Soviet time in Russia, where there was a production of anthrax. Anthrax well known, and anthrax was weaponized by creating a shield around it with albumin. So it's an albumin coating around it, and when you make it just right size, it sticks in your lung. Because a spore can be that small that you inhale it and exhale it, no problem. Can also be too big to inhale, can also no problem in your lungs. And of course you can get cutaneous anthrax. But when it is the right size that it sticks in your lung alveoli, then we have serious problem, and it's anthrax, a very dangerous weapon. That was what was produced in Sverlov, and the accident happened, a cloud was released, and in the wind direction, you had several victims of this accident. And this was afterwards published in Science, where some Western scientists, after the fall of the Soviet Imperium, did an investigation where the deaths after this incident happened, just to learn more about how such an anthrax cloud spreads in the environment. Tomorrow, you will get a lecture about how biologics can spread and how you can calculate where the most dangerous areas are after an incident. Jean-Luc will tell you this tomorrow. In the middle, and that is also in the middle because it's really important, is crime. In crime, you see more and more that biologics are used as a weapon. It's an invisible one, which makes it easy. You can threat with it without having it. And we have seen both in Paris, but also in Germany, in Köln, in Cologne, that ricin was produced out of the castor beans. When you have castor beans and you shake it out with some solutions and you heat and do some simple chemical steps, which you can do in your own kitchen, it is easy to produce ricin. This was discovered both in Paris and in Germany, and therefore I think it is something which we have to be aware of, and also police forces. And I know there are some police forces over here in the auditorium. They should really realize that it can be used as a weapon. Very toxic chemicals like what was called the Salisbury. Novichok, yeah. Novichok was also used in the 80s already in Russia between some groups of bankers as a chemical weapon. So the criminal use of toxins, especially also for biological toxins, which can be easily produced, is something which we have to keep in mind. Bioterrorism is something which has happened. We have a lot of cases which are confidential because they were detected in time. Sometimes it's not in time. In Africa, in Asia, happens a lot of things where biological agents are used to threat. I mentioned here the anthrax letters as an example, but unfortunately, there are many more examples, especially with botulinum and some virus disease which were misused. The letter on the right side, you have the booklet of Ken Aliberg. He was a member in the Russian biological weapons program, and he fled to the USA and made a lot of attention on the biological threats from the Soviet system. I do not fear it that much, although there are some countries like North Korea who have an active bioweapon program. And in my function as military specialist, I visited a lot of laboratories all over the world. And I can also mention you that some countries are doing research on offensive use of E. coli. That happens, or I've seen it in Southwest Asia. And yeah, that is something where it can be state sponsored, but normally, yeah, I do not think states will easily use biological weapons, also because of the conventions, of course. But in terrorist groups, you can expect it more and more. Explosives is, of course, the common word, but you get chemicals and pipe, PKK, and a lot of other terrorist groups already have used chemical weapons, especially chlorine. Radiological is also used, and that the Czech and rebels have used the radiological as a dirty bomb. And for those, it was easy to get material because in the Soviet time, when you were spreading the seeds for grain or whatever, it was disinfected with a radiological spirit on top of it. And then all the fungi were dead, so you get a better harvest afterwards. And these radiological sources were in fact lost, or they were not used anymore after the fall of the Soviet Imperium. And then they came into criminal hands, and from there they came into the hands of terrorists. So that was also why the Czech rebels, as an example, used radiological sources for dirty bomb attacks. And CBRN, an example is the Ayun Seirikyo in Japan. I was involved in the research after the sarin attack in the Tokyo Underground. But before the attack on the Tokyo Underground, he did also some attacks with biologicals, like with anthrax. But the anthrax strain we used was a vaccination strain, and for that reason, he vaccinated, in fact, his target. He said that he killed them or threatened them with disease. But that was already an example where you could see that biologicals were also one of the tools terrorists would like to use. And here we see an example of a guy who has been in jail for a while, but is now still somewhere in the Middle East. That is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And he had several meetings with IS and other groups where he suggests, or his request can be, I have not been with these meetings, otherwise the guy was disappeared, that he can make biological and chemical, but especially also biological threats to help terrorist groups in getting their goals done. And biologics and chemicals are effective. We know. It was not always the case. In the past, they thought, more objectable mass destruction weapons, when you spread it, it will come back to you, so that's a boomerang effect. Russians, with the anthrax in Sverdlovsk, they had already something to prevent the boomerang effect. Are you aware of it? It's a bacteriophage. A bacteriophage is a virus which can kill bacteria. And so, yeah, you are a microbiologist, so you should know. And the bacteriophage can be very specific for anthrax. So the Russian soldiers, they had already bacteriophages with them. So when there was an anthrax attack, only those who were not protected by the bacteriophage would be affected. And that was how they would prevent the boomerang effect. Atmospheric condition dependence, that is spreading of the biology. How do you do it? Because mostly they think that you do it by air, but it can be also done by the mail, as you have seen with the anthrax letters in the US. So be creative, and technical difficulties. And the technical difficulties were also in the, specifically in the US, where in 1932 there was a debate on biological threats. Leon Fox, the general of the armed forces and the advisor on this, he said, no living organism will withstand the temperature generated by an exploding military shell. How conservative. Why always with explosives? Yes, we have CBRN E. I prefer always CBRN because the E is small because the explosive is not always the dispersion. You can disperse it with many other vehicles or with many other technologies. And it was in Japan that the CEO Ishii already said, well, during all the wars we had in past history, more soldiers had been killed by disease than by actual battle. It's correct. That is why germ warfare was outlawed about 100 years ago by the Geneva Disarmament Convention. You understand? And he said, Fox Peace is fantastic and not based on scientific facts. I agree. But where I do not agree is what he did with his knowledge. Because he put up a Japanese biowarfare program. And in the 30s, you had the China-Japanese wars. And the Japanese troops invade Manchuria. And in this war, a lot of biological threats were used. They even built up a Unit 731 to do some experiments with biological threats. And this is a very, very black page in Japanese history. They used plague, they used a lot of microorganisms to spread biological threats. And spreading this has a risk. During the Second World War, a lot of things were developed or there was research on it, like anthrax in the UK. So they tested in an island with only sheep, Gunner Island. And in Gunner Island, they indeed killed the sheep with the anthrax, but the island was for decades a no-go area because of the no-go area because they could not clean it easily. Anthrax as a spore is very, very stable, and that makes it that it is dangerous for a long time. And at this moment, they almost have fixed the island with formalin, and that makes it again accessible for human beings, not fearing the anthrax. Botulinum toxin as Agent 10 was also developed by the US in Camp Detrick, which is afterwards US Emirates, an institute, where also the anthrax was under investigation. And Churchill ordered during the Second World War 500,000 anthrax bombs at a Vigo plant. I know they were ordered, but whether they were really used is not known. Probably a lot of these materials were not supplied. And anthrax, is something which is a red line as a recognized biological weapon, as a fear in all periods. About 15 years ago, there was a huge panic about anthrax in drugs, injectable drugs, and there was already a discussion whether it was contaminated on purpose because competing criminal groups trading the drugs, but in fact it was not that aggressive because it came from the production. In Afghanistan, I've been there also, the drugs are produced on the soil. The soil is quite rigid, so you can do your chemical reactions in some holes in the soil. And they can also in a mortar stabilizing and mixing and those things were done on the soil. But on this soil, there were also sheep who had the natural anthrax, and so the drugs were in this way contaminated with the anthrax. Something which also happened with anthrax in Turkey. In Turkey, sheep were infected and buried somewhere in the fields, and 10 years, 20 years later, an entrepreneur thought, well, this will be a nice holiday village, and they started building there. So with digging, they got the anthrax on the workers, and they got cutaneous anthrax. Another example how anthrax can be dangerous. Even in the Netherlands, we have anthrax, the cows with the cattle. But when cattle is dying from anthrax in the Netherlands, they buried it in a special way in the past. Now it's incinerated. When you see the Netherlands, flat country, nice green meadows, and suddenly you see some trees in the middle of the meadows. Why? Those are the points where cattle infected with anthrax was buried, covered by caustic soda, and then they planted trees, knowing never dig there in the soil because it is potentially dangerous. So, preparedness was already in the past over there. And preparedness we also need internationally. We get the more and more one health, or one world, I should say, and one health. Because we have a lot of interaction by flying, by transport of goods all over the world. When we are shipping, we know that it is a potential threat to get materials from one sea to another sea. Because when a carrier has no payload, so there's no containers on it, it takes water for the ballast. And when this water is taken somewhere in the southeast of Asia and it is unloaded somewhere in Europe, it happened already that some shrimp or other small sea animals think, wow, this is a nice environment. I can replicate here. I have no enemies anymore, and then it disturbs the microbiome completely. So the biological balance is sometimes disturbed by exotics coming from other countries, and that is just by pumping water in Asia and pumping water out in Europe. There are more examples of this, of course. You know, also in the plants, that some plants in Europe are quite aggressive and are overwhelming the normal vegetation in Europe. So be aware of exotics. Also, exotics in flies or mosquitoes. Knowing this and knowing that the travel, the microbes are joining you, in military operations, it is very important that you clean, disinfect all your equipment before you bring it back home. When we have your telephone is in the middle, the other side. When we had our mission in Mali, in Africa, all equipment coming back from Africa to the Netherlands was disinfected at the location where it was loaded, in the harbor of Dakar, where it was on the ship, and after it came from the ship into the Netherlands. And this makes sense, because those microbes you cannot see, but it can disrupt the ecology, the biological balance in the soil enormously. And so it can affect agriculture. And when it affects agriculture, it affects it for a very long time, or perhaps permanently. And that's not what you want. So therefore, it's very important to disinfect equipment which is coming from another microbiome, from another area into your own area. I can also explain it with something else. When you are a time in Afghanistan, for example, because several deployments in Afghanistan, when you will get a scratch on your skin, healing lasts longer. You probably know why. No? Question mark? Well, your skin microbiome changes when you are for a longer time in another area. And when you have a scratch, the immune system gets active, looks what is over there, sees a lot of microbes which are unknown to your immune system, has to build up immunity. They are harmless, they do not make you ill, but still the immune system has to learn what's on your skin after a scratch. And therefore it takes longer for healing when you are outside your own area compared to your own area. Something which in the Russian armed forces was already known, because they had creams with the bacteriophage against the microbes which were common in other areas where they were on deployment, like in Afghanistan. As you know, before the NATO forces and UN forces were in Afghanistan, the Russians were over there, and they had their own experience. Okay, so far about one world, one health. I think this is a very important thing to realize, that the world is different, you have different cultures, you have different ethics, also different microbiomes. And yes, of course, we can share, it takes time, and therefore it takes time for healing. And sometimes it was fatal, like when in the Middle Ages or at the end of the Middle Ages, we discovered New Mexico. Spanish came there and brought, of course, the European illnesses over there, which were unknown in America, and it caused a lot of victims. So it's serious. And this is in between, and that is, chemicals are considered as dangerous. We have the OPCW. You have had your lectures already on the chemicals and the Schedule 1, Schedule 2, and Schedule 3 chemicals. It's well organized. But you have a limited number of chemicals which are toxic. In biologics, that's different. And we get continuously new threats, because in biologics we have evaluation, and that makes it very interesting. With radiological, it is even easier, because you have alpha, beta, gamma, and that is the real threat. So in the UNSCR 1540, non-proliferation and countering cyber and terrorism, biologics got more attention and was also more described. Because one realized that it is easy to use, and in the world, it is difficult to control. Biological materials, or the material you need for spreading it, is not easy to find within containers, even when, especially when they are transported on a ship like this, and one of those containers could contain something. And like with radiological things or with checking containers in these arches, which is X-ray arches, it's also difficult. And even with chemicals, the Ayunthanikyo could make his sarin production plant near Tokyo in an industrial hall without having been discovered for a very long period. He got this equipment for producing sarin from an old Russian plant, which was dismantled on purpose because Russian dismantled all the offensive chemical weapon plants, and was transported over Korea. And by fishermen boats in parts, it was transported to Japan, and it was not recognized as being dual use or threatening material. And in this way, the Ayunthanikyo could build up his own plant producing sarin. This creates awareness with the customers because there are a lot of dual use aspects, and these dual use aspects should be prevented. Quite difficult, but sometimes successful. This is in China, no, it was in Japan, where a Chinese national was detected with strange bottles. And when you have a lot of this equipment with you, it is doubtful. And nowadays, the customs are more aware. What could it be? And also, there's now more detection equipment to test what kind of materials are in these bottles. Chemicals and biological samples were also seen in other issues. It's happened, and this is US FBI information. A lot of these materials are coming from China. China is producing a lot of materials which can be dual use and is quite open to trade it. So by AliExpress, you can get a lot of materials already. And I will come back to this later on the do-it-yourself laboratory. This makes that more and more attention is with the European Union. It's also with the Centers of Excellence of the European Union to make customs aware about the trade, distribution, transport of potential dual-use materials over borders. And therefore they need, on one hand, the expertise, but on the other hand, also the detection equipment, which makes it possible to get doubtful things in vision. It is more like the medical doctor does to see the abnormal than directly detect what is dangerous. Because in biologics you have such a diversity, it is not, I'm only looking for white powder for anthrax. And when you are looking for white powder which is anthrax, it's not really successful. Because there are a lot of hoaxes and you have a lot of white powders. I will come back to that as well. So when something is different from the usual, and that's gut feeling for a part, you should go further in investigation and doing some tests. And you get more and more, and that's in development now, tests where you have a kind of artificial organ or artificial human cells, when they are affected with these materials and it has a negative effect, it will be measured. And that is something what's the future for customs. How to find something which is different? There are also serious games like this one, where a custom authority or a custom officer opens a container, has to check what is in the container, and then he learns how to detect those aspects which are dual use. Nice play, but very good to know that these serious games are already available and should be used by custom authorities to prevent that dual use goods are coming into your country. Yeah, I already mentioned the dual use, the misuse of CBN chemicals or materials. Already mentioned that mostly it is non-state actors, terrorists, criminals, and between states it is less visible. And this is a study from 2022, so fairly recent, where the weapons of mass destruction use predominantly is in the non-state actors, but also do not underestimate insider threats. The anthrax in the US probably was an insider threat. Attacks on the critical infrastructure only. And most important, the hoaxes. Of course, you can have your countermeasure opportunities. Realizing this, therefore, awareness that one of this aspect of this course is important. Who is getting some because chemicals which are dual use? Who knows about synthesis? Whereas knowledge and the materials combined, the equipment, who is in suddenly buying PPE, personal protective equipment. That is something which can be already recognized in the acquisition phase. Development phase, device building. Yeah, the Japanese missed it during the Simon attack and the chemical preparation, but that is one of those aspects. Execution phase, operational, how to bring your biological or chemical weapon to a certain place. These are US examples, and everywhere at each moment there could be a flag coming up. Well, have a closer look to this, and this happens. The FBI in the US already had a special protocol, a form to identify suspicious behavior, and that's normal aspects like vague on the intended use of the product, pay cash, reluctant to show an ID, unusual ordering patterns, and purchase address different from shipping address. Those are the doubtful things which one should recognize at the moment something is in preparation. And then, yeah, when they are successful, a CBN team has to go in action, and we have to do some work. The time is that I'm now talking already 50 minutes. I could suggest to have a short break, and then I will come into the influence of media. Nothing? Yes, you want to have a short break? Then I expect you to be back in 15 minutes. So I start 3:05. Yeah? Are questions at this moment already? No? Then in 3:05, I expect you back. Short break from 15 minutes now. Nobody was thinking. I think I'll be relaxed now because the workshop I had to share it with the guys. So I don't think that will event. I have 2 words now, this. One for the national, the international, and one is in people situation.
That's the same.
They need to take time for preparation, they need to take time and make presentation, because I tested the presentation. And the group should be about 4 to 5. This group is too big for this, so we have more presentation.
So no, not today.
Of course, you know.
Quindi lui succede.
When I think of a time, you know, time frame, then I think it's not really good in this situation.
So what are you going to
Yeah.
Yeah. I like to be
Yes, poi c'è la responsabilità che in realtà è abbastanza piccola, perché sono bambino piccolo, lei fa 9 minuti, quindi è così, e quindi andiamo a bomba tendenzialmente e vedremo.
Where's big points?
If James as well.
I think it only takes. I mean, I possibly have a song.
I couldn't.
50 cents.
I know that machine.
I
I don't feel lost. I feel lost.
It's gonna be the same.
They changed.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, I saw do not. That takes too much time. Okay. I'm staying here.
If you need anything, just let me know.
No, I'm not.
Punishment for those who come late,
Yeah, still 5
like in
minutes,
the military.
of course.
Joking.
Push-ups, 40 times. The German time. Thank you.
Are you retired as officer?
Yeah. Unfortunately,
Ah,
too old to be in military.
what age do you have to retire? 60? In the as officer.
Depends on what your rank is and what your function is.
Ah,
I retired when I was 66. At 65, I even have been in Afghanistan.
really? As advisor.
Hmm?
As advisor.
Well, I had to do some safety issues over there. So I was armed over there. So I was operational.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, when I came into the Navy, the retirement age was 50. And at the end, I retired when I was 66 and 4 months old. So times changed. I paid a lot of money for my pension, which is still the same. So I overfinanced it, I think.
How old are you, if I may ask?
I'm 69.
So, too young.
Yeah, you look much younger.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Otherwise, I cannot have that much experience.
What is the pension stage nowadays? Pension age nowadays in the Netherlands?
The normal pension age is 67.
Also in Italy, but over the years it's going to be much higher.
Yeah, the same for the Netherlands.
I think all Europe.
Yeah.
We should first.
It would be 70 or even
No, we
more.
will live longer. That's it.
Well, at a
Simple.
certain moment, the increase of average age will stop.
Yes, it's not biological is not possible then.
No. And you get new diseases, you get cancers more and more. So there are other.
For example, I read that in the pathology book that nowadays there are allergies every time, every kind of allergy that are due to the
hygiene.
allergy.
Yeah, because you're.
From that to the lifestyle.
Yeah. When in Africa, for instance, when they were still barefoot, they had more
Yeah, because
immunological.
they live in the ground.
Yeah.
So they have
They had
protection.
contact with soil bacteria, and there was a region in West Africa where they didn't have tuberculosis because there was a microbe in the soil which was similar to tuberculosis, and so it protected them against tuberculosis. But when they were going to wear Nikes shoes, then suddenly tuberculosis came up.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have the natural resistance anymore.
Right, yeah, right.
But same applies with your gut health.
Ah, God help.
Because now we are eating more and more processed foods. We
Yeah.
don't get that kind of microbes here
Yeah.
either.
Also, you know,
Yeah. What is your background?
I'm a
everything, everything.
military
Your military.
originally, but nowadays, and then I did a bachelor's in safety and risk management, and now I work as a fireman paramedic
Okay, where?
in CERN.
In
Third,
Sir.
CERN. Third.
Oh, yeah.
You know CERN, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Ah, they are coming in time.
yeah. Third, fine. Here.
Yeah.
Yeah, but my background is around the safety security research, but military. And then paramedic. So, not like your.
Okay.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah.
Okay. I give you another 30 seconds. I assume that everybody is in time because they feel the 30 push-ups when you are too late for the lectures, isn't it? Well, you are complete again. Huh? So what's it, please?
The second, she was on
On call.
Yeah.
Okay, excuse.
Yes.
Just group. Okay, let's start. About the media. The chemical and biological weapons are invisible. And that makes it a threat for hoaxes. Because you cannot see it, you can attack with it without having it. When you have a pistol, you see the pistol. When you threat with a disease, nobody can detect it immediately. So, media and also the social media and the influence of this is of, and has a huge impact on the civilians feeling themselves threatened by biological yeah. And anything in the invisible level, it is ideal for hoaxes. You know the procedure, how you create a rumor, just have a narrative, prompt a narrative, a seeding procedure, and then make a kind of artificial amplification of this narrative by sending it to different. But that just, you have an excuse probably that you are late. Otherwise, it's 30 push-ups. That military style. I'm now busy with the hoax creation. So having a narrative, amplifying the narrative in special directions, targeted, and then you can amplify it by social media, by all this kind of Twitter, Facebook, whatever, X of course. And at a certain moment, because you have here the target distribution, you get multi-source in the organic amplification. And when it gets multi-source, then you get a viral spread at a certain moment, and the media are taking it over. And then you get the threat of something which does not exist, which is in fact fake news or hoax. And it is so easy nowadays because most people, and this is an example from the US, they get their news in another way. Most of them, they get news from social media, from their smartphone. Very fast news, hot topics immediately, and less from print publications, which have a journalist behind it, where you have a here and here again. So you check your facts. In the social media, the facts are not checked, and that makes it so easy to spread a rumor. And this rumor can be quite disruptive. Therefore, when I was in West Africa with the Ebola, we had a lot of attention that the information was given in a reliable way, having not only words, but also graphics to explain and to be helped by local people who are spreading the information. Because some generals, war leaders, influentials in the region, they were spreading the news that, these people for medicine staff on chair, Doctors Without Borders, they brought the Ebola instead of they are only taking care of the victims of it. And this information management is very important to not to disrupt the society. One of the things which disrupted society enormously was the 9/11. And after 9/11, the attack on the Twin Towers in the US, you got these anthrax letters. And these anthrax letters were indeed contained anthrax and a weaponized anthrax, and it had its victims. Probably it was spread by scientists from USM Brit, Bruce Irvins. It's not sure because he committed suicide before he was on trial. So officially it's unknown who was posted the anthrax letters, but it's quite obvious that Bruce Irvins was the guilty guy, and he wanted to get more attention for his research program. Well, he got it. These anthrax letters had 4 deceased people, 5, 1 in Florida as well. It was an old woman. Could have been a natural case, because anthrax is still in the world and it is not an unknown disease. So 4/5 deaths after this anthrax. And the panic was enormous. All over the world it was panic. Everybody feared the white powder. Some years before that, we had an accident with a jacuzzi which was on display at a flower exhibition in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, it was an accident. The jacuzzi was infected with Legionnaire's disease. And this caused a mortality at the flower exhibition of 11%. 21 persons died from the infected jacuzzi. Accident, it could also be a man-made incident. Have you ever heard of it? Probably not. Why? Because when this event should have been after 9/11 or after the anthrax letters, it would probably be world news. 9/11 gave a big shift in the attention on asymmetric attacks. Attacks which are uncommon, something which you do not expect, and therefore we have to pay more attention on these kind of incidents which can happen. And also be prepared. This is the example of the laboratory of Daniel Garin. Daniel Garin, general of the French Armed Forces. I was with him in Africa. That was another thing. Before he went with me to Africa, he had the so-called white powder lab in Grenoble in France. It's now not existing anymore. It's now all in laboratories near Paris. But in the Grenoble lab, he got after 9/11 a lot of samples of materials. You see it over here, with white powder, dangerous, potential threat. And he even got this card from Air France, which is still living at this moment. He has it at home. Came well packed, well preserved to his laboratory. He's a white powder in it. Panic. Was probably think as well. It was still powder. So not a threat. But having all these hoaxes, these materials which have contained white powder without being dangerous. This lab capacity at a certain moment in October was that we got more than 80% more samples than he could measure. The green line was his lab capacity. That makes that 80% is untested. So a smart terrorist will do a lot of hoaxes first and then a real thing. The lab is overwhelmed with samples, and the real one is in that part, in this case 80%, which is not tested because of lack of capacity. Lessons learned for a country: do not have only one white powder lab, but have a backup or organize it in an international way that others can measure as well because of this specific threat. And in France, it also happened, the white powder, but that was positive for plague. Did not give an outbreak, but it gave some disruption. Specialized laboratory has to be involved, press conference to inform the people. But again, spreading not by explosion, simply by mail. And spreading these disease infected materials is getting more and more easy. Most of the diseases which we fear are the so-called zoonotic diseases. Zoonotic diseases are diseases which can come from the animal world to the human world. Examples are influenza from birds to human, sometimes it happens. Anthrax from animals to human, two differences. With the influenza from birds to human, then it is from human to human as well. Anthrax to human, then it's not infected from human to human again. So there's a difference in zoonosis, and the most dangerous is of course such a zoonosis which also can jump after a jump from the animal world to human, between humans as well. This can be strategically used by bioterrorists, what kind of microbe is used. We have also species jumping, that's from SIV to HIV as an example. Similar immunodeficiency virus to the human immunodeficiency virus. That means that the monkey infected the human being, but it doesn't go backwards. The human being cannot infect the monkey anymore. The virus has changed in such a way that it is now a typical human virus. This kind of terminology you need to know, because then you also know what are potential threats. And one of the biggest threats I have here on the left corner is the bat. You know why a bat is so dangerous? No? It is a flying rat. And a rat flying costs a lot of energy. You know that the virus only can survive in its host cell, because a virus uses the host cell for the replication. What a virus is doing is comes into your own cells, in the host cells, uses the mechanism in your cells to reproduce itself, so it in fact mimics the genetic information in your cell, and then your own cells are producing a lot of virus cells. That's the reason, because the virus is absolutely depending on the host cell, that a brown deer or a squirrel in the north of the US or Europe, or a brown bear during its winter sleep, the hibernation phase, cannot be infected by virus, because the metabolism which you can use is not there. Now going back to the bat. The bat is an animal which has during the day a lot of energy used, and then it goes into sleep, hanging in a cave or in the building. Then it does not go to sleep, it goes into hibernation. So its temperature goes down, the metabolism goes down, oxygen use goes down, nutrition use goes down, and virus cannot replicate.
No, but they need the same aggregation.
Yeah, correct. Only viruses which can make a pause as well, so can hibernate in a way as well, can survive this. So in a band, you select those viruses which are able to survive outside a host cell. And that happened with Ebola. When Ebola started in the middle of Africa, it was very deadly. It's not that effective. You need close contacts to have a deadly disease. In West Africa, it was less deadly, but far more effective because you could also be infected by touching the table. And that was because it was brought from Central Africa to West Africa by bats. And in this slip, selected in such a way that only those viruses which could survive a period of no nutrition or no metabolism, no replication, could survive, and that were the strains which also could be infected over a surface. So that makes why bats are so dangerous, and that was also the criticism on the Wuhan Institute, where the SARS virus was tested with bats to give it additional features. Yeah. This was in the Ebola time very important to give as much as possible information, and that especially people can survive Ebola. Because when people think, oh, I have Ebola, I'm going to die, yeah, sorry, no, you can be treated, you can survive. And that's important to tell people because otherwise they hide themselves in their condominium, and there are infected workers in the condominium. And it's better to have the infected patient in a healthcare center. Here I explain again the zoonosis. It can be from wildlife to human, but wildlife to domesticated animals, and domesticated animals to human again. When we have the bird flu, it can occur that a certain strain, yeah, by the normal mutations that comes into existence in wildlife, goes to infect the chicken in Southeast Asia, and the chicken in Southeast Asia are living very close to the farmer, and at a certain moment you get a mutation that the farmer gets infected, and then you can have a worldwide outbreak, a pandemic of such a bird flu. And that is how nature is organized. And unfortunately, and that's partly due to the fact that we get more and more travel, we get more and more infectious diseases in the world. Ebola already mentioned, Zika virus is one of those things which is popping up. Chikungunya is getting more and more prominent. Measles is getting more prominent. We have the MERS, of course. So all kind of respiratory viruses are emerging, and yeah, after the MERS we have the SARS and Corona. So this is an issue. Monkeypox, nowadays we call it Mpox, is also one of those new emerging diseases coming from Congo, and got quite quickly a lot of cases all over the world, but all traced back to Congo. People who have been there or have been in contact who were there. Monkeypox is typical a disease which was still by touching only, so it is not yet that you can have it infection on the surface, or that you can have infections airborne. So it's now also limited the number of cases of mpox. Still, the lessons learned from other diseases which I just mentioned is that when it gets extra features of being able to survive outside the host cell, it can be like Corona type 2, a very big outbreak. It has killed quite a lot of people, certainly predominantly in Congo. And the transmission was from animal to human, that's why it was monkeypox, but it now also from human to human. Then it is mentioned mpox because it has an ethical aspect. For me, it's still monkeypox because the origin of this pox variant is coming from monkey. There's a vaccine already against the mpox virus, and it is mostly by skin to skin or sexual contact, so very close contact, that you can get this new strain. And you're lost. Not about monkeypox. Are there any questions? Because do not hesitate to ask whenever a question. In nature, our genetic system has all kinds of connectivity elements. Connectivity elements are the joining, the building blocks of genetic information. And that makes sense, because you can use these clusters of strains to make changes in the genetic system. And that is used by CRISPR-Cas. And CRISPR-Cas is one of those things everybody can use in kids. And it's quite easy to change by using this interspace palindromic repeats to build in other features, genetic features, in the genetic systems of living organisms, like microbes. And in a do-it-yourself lab, you could even do it. And well, labs are not very expensive. I already mentioned AliExpress. And you can get a lot of materials from there. You can make also with 3D printing and with a normal drilling machine and this kind of device which you can build yourself. Very cheap centrifuge. So all kind of materials which are typical lab equipment and normally quite expensive. Nowadays it is easy to produce. And so a do-it-yourself laboratory you can build in a garage like here, and with the costs which are affordable, really affordable. Improvisation of what you need, but it's no need to have a perfect project because you are making the project to make a biological threat anyway. With CRISPR-Cas, you can buy a lot of kits which are easy to be formed in this kind of laboratories. That's one. You can also make it in art. This, sorry that I'm saying, this professor, Stephen Kurtz, he's an idiot. The idiot thinks he's an artist. He's an artist creating new forms of life by mixing all kinds of genes. And yeah, he lost his wife because she died from a remarkable disease. But he even exhibited his DNA, bacteria, and other life forms at an exhibition, in an art exhibition. Yeah, these are things which are clearly dangerous because making art, making something new, you do not know what you make. it might be a very new pest or a plague or other dangerous disease. So this should be controlled. But also should be controlled is biological toxins or biological new types of variants of viruses you can design. And when you ask artificial intelligence to create a bioweapon, in 6 hours it gives you 40,000 suggestions. 40,000 suggestions which are really potential, deadly biological weapons. This made that scientists were thinking, well, we have to do something. We have to regulate this. Okay, it's good that you regulate this within the scientific community, but it is difficult to regulate this outside because for criminals, no rules exist. And then you say, yeah, it exists, it happens, and it's better to be aware of it and to be prepared than to stop this. Because stopping it does not prevent it totally. A normal person does not create a biological weapon, only criminals, and they are not obeying the law. So no sense of keeping this secret or to give to stop it in one or the other way. And I already mentioned as an invisible weapon, it is ideal for hoaxes. It is even more important to mention that there's nothing as a threat around you than specifically detecting a threat. With the anthrax that the white powders, yeah, in fact, you need a screening effort. This is milk powder or whatever. When somebody yelled, I spread a new pox virus, and you cannot measure it, it is more relief to the population than when you say there might be something, but you cannot measure it. That is communication. I already mentioned the communication. It's so important that you have your bio watch program, your bio laboratory system in place in the country, that it can also detect that there is nothing wrong at a certain moment. And when you can already beforehand publish that it is a reliable system, you can prevent a lot of disruption. When an idiot yells, he is threatening with something, but when it is not measured and everybody realizes it's a hoax, this kind of communication is of utmost importance, because I think most of the threats which will be there in the future are more a hoax than a real threat. And it is not uncommon that there are hoaxes. Even Putin did it. The labs in the Ukraine, 26 public health labs, previously so-called anti-plague labs, they were producing in the past really threats. They were anti-plague labs also in the offensive work to produce the biological weapons. But after the fall of the Soviet system, Stiestra, Defense Reduction Agency of the USA, and I was involved in this program, they stopped the offensive use of microbes and make it normal public labs. But Putin still remembers this, and he said, "Hey, the Americans are now using these laboratories, these public health laboratories in Ukraine, for producing dangerous biological weapons. Well, I have a recent report of the microbes which are present in the freezers, quite common for a public health lab. So no threat. And fortunately, this rumor, this hoax, which Putin tried to get into the world, was stopped quite quickly. Still, it's right. And this you can do with all kind of BSL-4 or BSL-5 labs in the world, BSL-3 or BSL-4 labs in the world. And on the most remarkable places, you have these biosafety level 3 or 4 labs in place. So some developing countries, in some projects in which I work, they asked for a BSL-4 lab. And then I said, why? You know BSL-3 and 4 levels? So BSL-3 is enough for detecting very dangerous biologicals, and BSL-4 is more for gain of function research, where you are doing developing dangerous or do research on dangerous species. But when you do not know what a species is, you have only diagnostic use, that BSL-3 level is enough. And so when such a developing country asked for a BSL-4 lab, I asked, do you have the intent to make biological weapons? What are you doing? You do not need this. And this makes that a lot of these labs are on the biosafety level 3. And the biosafety level, recently, a few weeks ago, I was in South Africa for a biosafety biosecurity audit, indeed here in Johannesburg. And yeah, does not completely fit the regulations. I have experience in the Speeds lab in Switzerland, which is the most modern BSL-4 facility we have. Speeds lab is, by the way, also one of the reference labs of the OPCW, but that's for chemical and for some biological toxins. But they have a perfect lab. Not all these labs are perfect. So in China, you have quite a lot of BSL-3 and 4 labs. And that makes that it might be that a microbe can be released by accident out of such a lab. It can be under a shoe sole, but it can also be that a mice or other small animal comes into the lab, takes away one of the microbes which is normally in the lab, and infects another mice, infects a rat, infects a cat. The cat infects a human. The human doesn't get ill because it's not really adapted to human to make humans ill. The human infects a rat or a dog or whatever, and so you get ongoing zoonotic disease. And at a certain moment, it can come from a cat to a human, and it happened that by evolution and selection, it is certainly very effective, and it goes from human to human infection, and then you get an outbreak worldwide. Then we speak about man-made virus disease, which had its origin more than a year before in a lab which is doing gain of function research without really the intention to make it, but by accident it can happen. You cannot exclude it. Therefore, it's so important to have these BSL-3 and BSL-4 labs well controlled, and also to prevent that gain of function research without any useful intention is done. We can have a discussion on this later. But I'm very strong in this that gain of function research must be limited as much as possible. This also draws the attention of the UN and the biological weapon conventions. It gets more attention for the implementation. And at UN level, that means that there's a lot of paperwork, because that's where the United Nations is very good in, to make and to create paper. So there's renewed attention, which is good. And this gave already some recommendations. And the recommendations for part is more bureaucracy, establish public-private artificial intelligence task forces with subordinate technical working groups. A lot of talking, but anyway, they realized that artificial intelligence can help terrorists or criminals in producing new biological threats, which can be uncontrollable at a certain moment. Now, more of these recommendations mandate DNA synthesis screening, which is also similar to having a continuously monitor on the microbiome around us. So check all the microbial RNA and DNA around us by sequencing, which can be done easily nowadays. Evolution in the UK has technology to make very large strains, and then with the nanopore from Oxford Biotech, Oxford Technology. Yes. You can do the sequences, and that is quite cheap. So have continuously a good survey on your microbiome, and when something is weird, something is different from normal, be alerted, test what it is, test from which species it comes, and then you can come into action. This can be natural, it can also be man-made. Other recommendations are the enhanced biosafety and biosecurity norms. That was why I was in South Africa. And invest in early warning and detection. And that is the monitoring program like the BioWatch program, which we have in the US and will be improved soon. Later, I will come back to this. I'm coming back to the dual use dilemma. Of course, there's a lot of research done to make new vaccines, to have very good effects for detecting diseases. But the same can be used to use this threat, and that is something which we have to control. In the US, it is controlled now more. In other countries, less. But there should be an intention to have better control on the so-called dual-use research and dual-use goods which are traded in and out the country. Example of dual-use aspect where it was going wrong was a foot and mouth disease vaccine producer in the UK. And in a certain moment, some years ago, there was an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in England, which caused a lot of economic damage. And it was just an accidental release of a strain of foot and mouth disease from this factory producing vaccines. So it can happen. It can happen with anything. Dual use is of course also this kind of things. It's a picture from China. Women, they are trained as drone pilots for spraying pesticides. And this was a nice publicity from China. See how effective we can use drones for spraying pesticides over big fields. I think in this auditorium, in this course, we have also other ideas what we could spread. So this is indeed the dual use aspect. And one should control what is really happening here. The gain of function research That is also different gain of function, huh? Because it selects those viruses which can be also living outside the host cell. And yeah, you can select it by a bet, but you can also give functions by changing genetic information. And in the US, a Boston lab makes a new deadly COVID strain by putting the spike protein from the Omicron, so the later strains of the coronavirus, to an older strain which was very deadly, and then wonder, this is a more dangerous coronavirus. Of course, you make the infectivity higher with the spike protein, and the infectivity or the deadliness of the coronavirus of the first strain was bigger than the others. So, of course, this is what you expect. But why are you doing this? I already told you, if this BSL-4 lab should not be perfect, it could have been that this even more deadly coronavirus would have created COVID-21 from the US. Fortunately, it didn't, but it could happen. And why are you doing this kind of research? Just make added information for science, so far I know. But it is exactly the same where the Americans accuse the Wuhan lab, and it cannot be excluded that a year before the outbreak, already some of these viruses from the coronavirus strain was coming into the environment in rats, mice, or whatever, and infected at a certain moment a human. Yeah. I think it is feasible. It's not proven yet, but it is absolutely feasible. And then you see what is happening when such a strain, this purple strain, suddenly comes into exposure in Wuhan and spreads further. You see, it's not really adapted to humans. You get a lot of different strains and spreading over the world, in different strains. Virus is replicated by the cell, close contacts, and also sneezing spreads it. In fact, the SARS coronavirus type 2 had two additive functions. One is that it normally coronavirus only infects the upper airways, and the added function was that it also could infect the lower airways, so that it could come into the ovary, and therefore there should be more becomes more deadly. I do not have a picture. I find it. It's not, it comes into the ovary, and then it gives an inflammation and it gives a blister, and that was why people got out of breath. And then you can also, the virus could go through the wall of the ovary, and then comes into the bloodstream, and therefore the corona was complete disease. So you get all organs could be affected. But that was how it started. But a virus, yeah, does this. It uses the human cells as a host cell and for replication. But has not the intention to kill the host cell quickly, because when your host is killed, you cannot replicate anymore. So it adapts itself in such a way that it is less deadly, but more effective. Same as with the Ebola. And that happened also in the creation of the SARS coronavirus 2 at a certain moment. First, you had a lot of different strains, and at a certain moment, the Omicron was dominant, and the old strains, which you can see over here, were completely vanished because they were not able to survive. There were some strains in some places still present, but worldwide it was mostly the Omicron there. That is normal what you get in virology. When you have a sore throat and then feel a little bit fever or whatever, it could be that you test positive on Omicron or on SARS, but it's not dangerous anymore. That's the evaluation of the surveillance. Well, we got, of course, in 2019 the outbreak in Wuhan. Before that, we already had some issues about unknown lung diseases in a region. They stopped, some people died, but it was up and down. And that was already explained. It can happen that a human being gets a lung disease from an animal, survives, or the immune system attacks it properly, and it does not go to a real outbreak. But at a certain moment, it can due to mutations. I mentioned this guy because he already mentioned that there was something ongoing, but he died from SARS himself. 1 year after the outbreak, WHO kind of inspection. Marion Koopmans I know personally, and she had also the opportunity to go by bus along the market to make pictures of the place where it should have happened. Well, I don't think this is very effective. It's very effective, and that is something which is also a lesson learned from it. When you are going in the past and you see something which is an unknown disease, isolate, identify, and then look what it could be. Because that gives you already a knowledge about something what could happen in the future. And that is, you can get this here from their internet, from their Facebook-like system, so public from and like for that, yeah, from the social media, and you can get a lot of information when you do the right analytics. And this is typical work for the intel organizations with the armed forces, where we look where something is going different or which is not fully understandable. I was there in Han, oh, that's a bottle, not another explosion. Didn't break, so no fear for chlorine or biologics. And I was in Wuhan in 2008. We did try to invest in the production agency to tell about new products, procedures, and evaluations of new vaccines. And one of the other presenters was Sinopharm, who provide Chinese children with international quality vaccine. That was why it was there. And then they had as an underline, provide children in the world with vaccines made in China. Yeah, I understand it now, because they were really prepared. It was the only halal vaccine they produced with Sinopharm. And so the Islamic world all chose the Sinopharm vaccine. And how came it? The vaccines are all based on Chinese data. I had good contacts with China until October 2020. At that moment, the communication was stopped and the research was gone. You have a question?
Just a question about the TSF4 lab.
Yeah.
In one of your previous slides, we see that in one this lab was in the middle of the city, and also in Rome, Spallanzani Hospital is in the middle. Why they are in the middle of the city? Are you working in their center? Their center is far away from the city.
Absolutely right. I know the situation in home. In Swedes, it's outside the city. It should be outside of the city. It should also not be in an existing building. It must be a separate building with its own air treatment system. And there I have a lot of difficulty. Even with. I'm sorry, it's a case. It should be outside and in a separate building, not in a building where you have other people as well. As for BSL4, BSL3, that's different. Because then you are doing the diagnostic, you have the patient already in your same building. With an infection clinic, especially for tropical disease, in the old situation, we had also a separate pavilion for infection diseases. Doesn't exist anymore. It's now an isolated department in a big hospital. But still, I'm in favor of having an infection clinic separate outside, which you can isolate in case of an outbreak. And in some countries, they really have this. And I think also in Abu Dhabi, they have this well organized. What they had well organized is that they had a good civil military cooperation, because when in January 8, 2020, the first SARS coronavirus 2 was identified from a patient, 3 days later, the genome completely was sequenced. Wonder, the US cannot do this. I cannot do this faster, but they were prepared. That's well in good intel. For the sequence, they used the NUTS quantum computer, which is, by the way, on the US blacklist. But anyway, the results of these experiments from China were well confirmed later by US and European labs. And on this sequence, the first vaccines and all first diagnostic kits, including those famous test strips which you have to do with samples from your nose, were designed. So this is a very important day that this genome was sequenced at January 11th. 4 days later, travelers infected with the normal coronavirus, and 5 days later, the human-to-human infection was confirmed. And then one day, the explosion of patients came because it was so infected because of the change which can create with the beds, that it is also possible to have a pause or to have a kind of hibernation. And so the number of patients exploded, but also China could build a huge hospital to take care of the patients. And that is being well prepared. Sorry. So you get changes in the novel coronavirus, and that's what you see on the right. You have all the same strain. In the meantime, when we had the outbreak of corona, there was no influenza issue. Typically, all the influenza which was in the world had approximately the same genetic structure. So we had all common antibodies against this strain of influenza. And that's the reason why we had no influenza outbreak in the winter of 2021. But as in China, all the children were covered and well isolated not to get SARS, to get the corona. They were almost maybe in perfect isolation. That's not good. My children were allowed to play in our horse stables and do dirty things in the soil and do getting ill, dirty things, because this creates a very effective and vivid immune system. Because of this isolation, a lot of Chinese children got diseases afterwards. Also, the normal child diseases like measles came later and more severe in the children. So there we have another aspect of the isolation and mouth mask and being too clean. One of the examples I can give in this is also from Africa. From the Institute of Tropical Medicine in London, I got this story. But there are certain population groups in Africa and West Africa which have quite a lot of resistance to tuberculosis. And when they were more developed and they got Nikes or shoes, they got more problems with tuberculosis. Why? Well, in the soil in that region, when they were still barefoot, they got infections from soil bacteria, which did not really make them ill, but that has elements, so some characteristics of the tuberculosis. So they create already immunity against it. That's the same as the immunity on the skin, which I mentioned with Afghanistan, that you have in other areas another immunity on your skin. Also on the soul it can happen. And because of the contact with these soil bacteria, the population was less susceptible for tuberculosis. When they have shoes, they got more susceptible for tuberculosis. So too clean is not good. In 2024, so last year, we had an influenza outbreak in Berlin, in Beijing. And this was sent to me as information because I have now again some contacts in China, and this was also as an example of good civil military cooperation that they could help a lot of Chinese diseased persons and could stop the further outbreak of this influenza. Also the coronavirus went further this year. In the Wuhan lab, you got another coronavirus isolated from a bat, which could be again an outbreak. Fortunately, it is controlled so far, but bats, I do not like them. They are a lot of, they are biological bombs because of their habit to live, to sleep in hibernation. They select viruses which are more effective, and bats are the harbor of all kinds of hemorrhagic fevers and also respiratory syndromes, and Ebola also. That's an hemorrhagic fever, by the way, Ebola virus. So I advise you only eat bats when it is very well cooked. Otherwise, it's just dangerous animal. And that's also the reason why in Africa sometimes you have the outbreaks like marburg disease. A lot of things are coming from this bush meat. And yeah, I tell a lot of things how you can make microbes even more dangerous. And then you say, well, should you tell this? Because these are things I can do in my own do-it-yourself laboratory and to threaten the world with biological threats. My opinion is, and I have done a lot of intel work also in the past in my military career, to make it secret does not give security. You can make a password that big, somebody else can invent it as well. So to keep those things secret doesn't make sense. it's better to be aware of the threat, to be prepared of the threat, and to do some preventive measures whenever accidents or incidents happen. And this goes with this series of slides. I give you now a break and the opportunity to give some questions. Let's first go for some questions. Our questions.
About the last minutes. It is true, knowledge from the scientific point of view, it's better to know before it's possible.
Yeah.
But for example, there are a lot of legal consequences of the disaster. For example, insurance or that is not so simple from the point of view of the people who easily share. I don't know if I explain what I mean.
I get your point. That's the result of the disaster. And because when you know that there is a potential threat, you should prevent everything at that moment. But that is also not possible. And to keep potential threat secret gives more disruption in society than to be prepared that there is potential threat. When you cross the street, you can be hit by a car. So should we forbid every car to drive? No, but that, in my opinion, that is the same level of discussion. When you fly over the country with an airplane can go down, because there should be forbid airplanes to fly. No. The airplane has a patient with Ebola on board. Some countries in the Ebola outbreak times did not give permission to fly over the country when there was an Ebola patient on board. So they had to reroute around a certain country to come to the hospital where the treatment could be given. I think this is nonsense because when you do risk calculation, it is a minimal gain of security, of safety. That's kind of
I agree with you, but from the lawyer point of view, especially for non-technician people, the temptation to hide and have the idea that probably nobody knows that start to me. The temptation to remove this blame should be possible. This is part of human
perception.
yeah.
Yeah. That is especially true for the dual use aspects. When you produce something which is dual use, should you stop it because of the negative use? You have also the positive use. I think be aware of the negative aspects of it.
Yeah.
We do not forbid all knives. With a knife I can kill you, but with a knife I need for cutting my meat. So
Guy?
yeah.
I mean, like, there is this constant argument that we need to regulate, but how can we regulate it in this?
Yeah. It's almost impossible. It's almost impossible. And therefore be prepared. Yeah. So when something is abnormal, which is not, and I will show you in the coming slides also detection methods how you can do it. When something is different from usual, then you have to be aware, alerted, and then do some research, and then do something whenever it's necessary. Like the Chinese and if the hospital in place. Further questions?
Just a curiosity about the influenza. Since every year we have a different strain of influenza.
Yeah.
How is it possible to make in advance the vaccine because at certain point during the year they claim now we have the vaccine for the next year influenza.
Yeah, it's not always exactly the prediction, but you can predict it from the influenza which is in the animal world in Southeast Asia. So some complexes which are generated by combining the elements of this virus. The virus is a building block of some elements, and the elements are changing. You can change, and that is, and also AI can help now a lot in predicting a new strain, which could be for the coming winter, the one. Yeah, that is a prediction, and you can do it by looking at what is already present or dominant at that moment in the animal world in Southeast Asia, where most of the zoonotic influenza are coming from.
Also because we start also from the ground.
Oh,
From the ground,
yeah,
past years.
yeah.
That I suppose we can modify that.
Yeah, I mean, because the old subtype which you had, the world has already its immunity because of the last year. So we do not need to make a vaccine.
escape.
It's on one hand, addition of new strains which you detect, and the other hand, exclusion of the strains which have been all over the world already, and most people are immune to. Further questions?
I had one, just curious.
Can I do as well? No problem.
You said before that, you were making the example of BSL-4 laboratory asked to be built in a developing country. Then you said, no, like, I'm making this question to understand you want to build biological weapons. So I was wondering, how come that a country decides to develop a BSL-4 and who actually managed like this kind of confusion? Is the international support unit helping in this or?
Yeah. Most countries want to have the biocell for lab because of status. And so the decision makers to have the biocell for lab are mostly not hindered by knowledge. And it is the international scientific community of public health and the WHO, the World Health Organization, who gives advice. And when there's a general opinion to have an ESL4 lab in a certain region because of the threat of diseases over there, it is better to have it as a WHO reference lab, like in Dakar, so that you can control it from international organizations.
Yeah, so there is a control for WHO.
Yeah. Further questions? Then I suggest to have a break till 4:30, 16:30, and then we will be here. And everybody who's late will have 30 push-ups.
Why is your email address of Germany? Your email address is a German.
Oh, because I have also some contacts in Germany. And Stiestra.nl was already occupied by family. So no, it doesn't matter. You can have a German email address.
No, no, but in which city have you worked?
I have worked in Munich for and then I've done some pricing work in Berlin, but in Munich I have contacts with some kids German, unfortunately. Connection by an exploding model. Sorry, I started already. That was for the systems. That the incident management is in fact a public health issue. Biological or chemical or radiological weapon is not directed to military only, it is also directed or predominantly to the population. So the reaction should be a reaction from public health authorities together with defense to scale it to a higher level. In fact, the public health is leading in the countermeasures against an incident in CBRN. And that's something for which is for military sometimes difficult to understand, but in fact, this is the case. The modus operandi, how you are doing it, sometimes ask more military style of operations to be more effective compared to the civilian way. And one of those aspects is the medical care. In the military situation, we always work with the so-called triage principle, where we give the maximum of medical care to a group of patients. And that means that you are not doing the first patient first and then the second and then the third, as normally is in the civil medicine. But when we see a patient which is almost dead, costs a lot of time and effort to recover, and we can help in the same time 10 or 20 other patients, then the 10 to 20 other patients is preference. But hard, but I think in general the most effective to give the best medical care to a group of persons. And of course, this group is seen as human beings and not weapons for some beings or whatever. So that about the threat and how to do the countermeasures. There's sometimes discussion about the chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear explosive that versus hazmat, as hazardous materials. For my opinion, there's not that big difference. When you are looking at the chemical substances or the biological substances which can be threatening us, whether it is man-made, natural, or considered as a hazardous material, doesn't matter. Yes, legal people can make an issue about it, and that's how local regulations are made. But in fact, the counteractions, to my opinion, are the same. And when you are doing a countermeasure already, you're in fact too late. Because a lot of things can be prevented. Prevention can be very simple. To spread infections on a doorknob can be done. Doorknobs are nowadays from all kinds of materials. This is aluminium. In the past, they were always from copper. You know why they were from copper? Same as the keys were from copper. And the same effect why our cavalry is still eating with their knives and fork from silver instead of steel or all the weird recyclable materials we have now. Because of the oligodynamic effect. You know the oligodynamic effect? Today in the afternoon, question marks. Now, the oligodynamic effect is very old, well known in the Middle Ages because they used copper for the keys and for the doorknobs and all handles and grips. As in copper, you get not the bacterial plague. Bacterial plague is when you get it on your teeth as well. Bacteria are covering the surface, and on the surface new layer of bacteria is growing. On that surface, you get a new layer of bacteria, and then you get a flame. Due to copper, which interferes with the membranes, it's not possible, and the same with silver. That's why we are eating with silverware. It's best than fork and knife. And this prevents very infectious strains of the infective microorganism, because the underlayer in this plaque formation gets less nutrition, gets less oxygen. That means that this layer, when a bacteria survives, it's more virulent, it's more effective. And that's also when you are getting your teeth plaque, it's removed by the dentist. Sometimes it can happen that it goes to bleed, and that one of those bacteria comes into your blood circulation, that gives a valve problem, a cardiac infection, or something like that. And normally a bacterium should not do that, but it is selected as a lower layer in bacterial plaque. It is more dangerous and can happen. And that's often the same. Fine. This should be from copper and you should eat from silver. A part of prevention. Prevention is that you are using materials which are antimicrobial when there is a microbial risk. I hope this one has an antimicrobial coating. Otherwise, I will infect you when I shake your hand. In the future, I have to give my hands a theater infection. So, prevention is also to keep animals clean, to keep a distance between the stables and the human population. A lot of things you can invent it yourself is already a kind of prevention. Detection. The diagnosis to detect which is different. When you see a new disease, do not rest and say, well, I do not know this disease as a general practitioner. Okay, probably it's a flu-like symptom and I hope you recover soon. No, when it's something weird, it is more interesting. And then you are going to do research, you take samples, you're going to measure it. Look when there's a Pennsylvania island in it. And that is a task of public health. And whenever it is a Pennsylvania island which might be threatening, then we have to come in action. And that response can be early, in an early phase already. And the response, when you have an outbreak, a sudden outbreak of a very infectious disease, like the SARS coronavirus 2. In China, they built a special dedicated hospital for it. Why? Why not in your normal hospital? In the hospital, of course. That's why.
A dedicated hospital.
Yeah.
So you don't mix the patient.
Correct. In Israel, they have a different entrance for abnormal patients in the hospital for better decontamination and so on. But they have also the policy that persons with unknown infection are not allowed in the general hospital departments. Even here in Rome, you have it. You have a dedicated hospital in the Tropical Disease Institute, where you have insulation, I think 20 insulation cabins for patients with very infectious diseases or unknown diseases, which makes sense. So when you have an outbreak, suddenly it's better to bring them all in a sports facility or whatever, because the people cannot infect each other. They have the same infection. You can provide the healthcare far more effectively, and your hospital stays in function. Otherwise, you have a disrupted hospital care, which you also do not want. So one of the protocols, the standard operation procedure that should be there in restaurant, should be already written, and it should be already in place the dedicated areas where you can give the care which is needed. And I will also pay some attention to the recovery phase, because we underestimated for a long time the recovery after a pandemic. And as lessons learned from the COVID-19 outbreak, I think we should pay more attention to the recovery phase, also to get the people more fit and do not have long-lasting problems like the long COVID. That is something is for part preventable. Preparation, there we start. This is the well-known, you have an incident, you do your operations to resolve it, and then you get in the post-incident phase. So nothing wrong, and then suddenly something happens, you go to the operation phase and you recover. And then the post-incident phase where I will pay some attention to as well. This start of the operation, you can already be prepared earlier when you know about situations, when you know that there might be an outbreak or something, or you know that there is seen that the terrorist is collecting some substances which could lead to an attack, which you still do not know where it is located, but you have already the warning, and that is intel work. You can already be better prepared, and you can be more effective in the operations phase. So, the slide is this: collect as much as possible information, do the analysis on it, and be prepared for whatever can happen. And when you are in one of those phases, the PDCA is always valid. The plan, do, check, and act. So when you have seen something here, go back to the pre-incident phase that you have in your planning it already. That when you have the operations and you have lessons learned, take care of this in your equipment procurement implemented, so that you are trained for the next time. And do exercise so that the military and the public health organization know what to do in case of an incident. In some countries, you have the first responders, and then you have governmental level, and then you have the armed forces. In some countries, you have civil defense organizations, and civil defense organizations can be more interactive with the first responders like hospitals, fire brigade, police, and police. And so then you have a level which can interact with the first responders and with the upscaling, if necessary, with the armed forces. And from the civil defense, it can also go to international cooperation in response on a certain incident. When I'm giving lectures for countries where this crisis response management, government management is still evaluating, I always support to have in between the first responders, the fire brigade, healthcare, and police, and the military in between layer, which can have their angles in both organizations, so the cultural bridge is covered more easily. Because indeed, it's a fact. Between the military and the civil responders, there is a cultural bridge, and this makes sometimes the operation phase a little bit more complex than it should be. And what is our goal when we have an action? Is it detect to treat or detect to prevent? Of course, we would like to detect to prevent, but let's hope it will be possible once. I do not think at this moment we can detect that fast that we can bring already the solution before the outbreaks comes into disaster phase. So detect to prevent, let's hope, to detect to treat, that is something where we should have as a goal. And remember, the PDCA cycle is always valid. It's a continuous learning process. And know that there's already a lot of things known. Land Cross in Rhodesia, 1975 to 1980, chemical and biological warfare agents were present over there. They were used in Rhodesia, and this knowledge is still there. They have a very old tradition with poison and biological poison because they had the arrows with the bow and arrows, with the poisoned arrows, with the poison from the scorpion, the snake, the frog, and also other poisons. So, and here other application methods of these toxins are described. Wouter Basson, a medical doctor originating from Belgium, in the time of apartheid in Africa, where apartheid time stopped in 1976. Before 1976, Wouter Basson had all kinds of threatening biological illnesses and procedures, and this is something which is also known in South Africa. When I was there, they still know about this. And we have to be aware that this knowledge is all over and can come to Europe and can come as a threat in the criminal or terror scenario near to us. And then we have to act. With chemicals, normally it's seen quite quickly, the effects. And so the responders can really act. First responders in 10 minutes are present in a toxic attack. Second, go for specialized responders, so that can. When you have bio, the lag time is longer. It's also more covered that you attack. And especially when nature is doing it, because then there's not a real uptake. And this we have to remember as well. Q fever, like this, you can get it from dust. Q fever is also seen as a biological weapon. But your problem is after 1 or 2 weeks. And before this, it can be either a hoax when it is announced, or it might be real, and then after a week you see the effects. What are you going to do? Well, you can do some preventive measures. So whenever UV patients pop up, that you have the right treatment in place. That's also with the corona. You need artificial ventilators, so for the airway treatments, and so you can have ventilators in place at the spot where you can expect an issue. These are the hemorrhagic fevers like Ebola and Marburg and Lassa fever. Marburg fever is also considered as a potential threat, but you see it after a few days. So earlier, but be aware what you can do when you get a lot of patients with Marburg at a certain moment. Then you have to be ready with a care facility in a sports facility, as already discussed a few slides ago. Medical care in hot or cold zone, what we have with radiological incidents, and sometimes with medical incidents, now, not really applicable with biologic because that's about lag time. So general CBRN, we call them hot zone, is not always there. Or you have to go, there is a threat in a region and you go for isolation. Then you create your own cold and hot zone. And that was also done in the Ebola outbreaks in Africa, where they just closed parts of the city to prevent further outbreak of Ebola. Is some social unrest. And yeah, that is political decision what you are going to do. Just to illustrate the complexity of the measures you are going to take. And first concern on public order, victims and public health. Yeah, and isolation of the group is a public order problem. More victims and public health is less effective. And yeah, it's always in the first hours, it is so important to make the right decision. And what I indicate over here is be trained, be prepared, training exercise. That is so important that you know your organization and know how to act whenever an incident takes place. And when such an incident takes place, you have also to do the forensics, because I already announced in my previous slide, it is forbidden. You are not allowed, according to international convention, to use biological weapons. Yeah. So clean everything and disinfect everything immediately to get rid of it. It's not the best, because then you cannot have the proof for the prosecutor to be to go to jail or to go for a good case. So you need your forensics activity, and normally the forensic experts are in a white coverall to prevent that their own material, their DNA, their cells, hairs, or whatever, is coming into the crime scene. But now the crime scene is also dangerous for the forensic specialists, so they have to do their work in real PPE, which is shown here. And they have also to look after different things. Blood clot, fingerprints is less important. More important is to find samples which can be analyzed and the existing analytic methods in the health system. So there's a need for more education for the forensic specialists, both in the PPE they have to use and the method of samples. The method of sampling of samples in the crime scene. This should also always be doubled, one for the healthcare use and the other for the forensic use. So when you are taking samples in a place where there is a potential biological incident, then yeah, double sampling is essential to have also the legal issues in place. Yeah, public health, very important. World Health Organization sometimes is under discussion. The World Health Organization has a department which is responsible for biological threats, and it's an Italian who has these responsibilities. And so they have absolutely a role worldwide in countering the effects of biological incidents. They are able to have antibiotic prophylaxis and immunization because they stockpile some vaccines. They can advise on the quarantine and isolation, and they also can make reports about suspicious packages and substances. But that's also where we have the customs who are looking after this. I'm training in the Netherlands, the customs organization. I think that makes sense because they should be more aware about what is doubtful and never be in the style of, I don't know what it is, will be good. Now, that is a no-no. Always be aware what you are doing. The PPE in the military is quite strong, but this is the PPE which Medicines Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders use it in Africa, and well, effective. And that's also something what I give to you as a lesson learned. It's okay, and you can do whenever there is not real PPE available with gloves, scrubs, goggles, which are not really produced for it but are effective. What is of importance, and that is something which should be trained in all the training sessions, that's a donning and doffing procedure. How to do it on. Mostly went well because people understand what they have to cover for good biosafety. But the doffing procedure, that is something you have to learn. When you take off your clothes, it's not allowed to touch something which is on the outside or has been on the outside, or to have the wrong sequence, and in which way you could infect yourself with substances which are on the outside. Most patients from NGOs who were supporting in the Ebola outbreak in Africa were not infected directly by the patients, they were infected by faults in their doffing procedure. So train doffing procedures, but I think that in this course also the donning and doffing procedure is trained. Yeah, the quarantine versus isolation. From the Ebola time, we had that some segments of Monrovia were closed. This created some unrest, and also the healthy and unhealthy persons were mixed. So still, I think this is not the best decision, but difficult how to make a decision. We can discuss a long time about this. Western people were mostly evacuated with containers like this. And yeah, Ebola was something which was not really by aerosols, by coughing, but it had its effect about over surfaces. And when a droplet was inhaled, then there was an issue. But when you have such a mouth mask, you get a droplet on it, you still inhale it. So there's a lot of discussion about this issue. With influenza, it's clear that can be transferred by airborne, from air. Some experiments were done with rats in Rotterdam once, where they tried to get a common disease which was not airborne to evaluate it or select it by having rats which were on a short distance from each other in such a way that it also could be airborne. And this is again a function research which was criticized and also, yeah, was limited in publication at that time, some years ago. This is what I suggested once in the Netherlands, but it was not accepted at that time. It's a long time ago, before the outbreak of Ebola, and also, of course, before the SARS coronavirus too. And it was to have an airport, which is not often used in the Netherlands, to make a hangar where whenever a plane should have all the same disease, like neuro disease. Neuro disease was my example, which I used. To go to the airport, have care for the patients all in a hall where all the same patients are collective treated. And yeah, at that moment, it was not the right time to implement such a thing. Now it gets more attention. Coronavirus got the count later, much later. And yeah, we have a lot of examples how it was not optimal. And we got healthcare facilities which were not usable afterwards. Because currently had adverse consequences, increased risk of this transmission in the quarantine population. You get massive of the government, you get all kinds of hoaxes, you get social stigmatization, economic impacts, and now with the social media, you get more and more discussion about why and how should this be done. And that creates a psychological response on this outbreak. Some people continuously are suffering the effects of COVID, having long COVID, which could be two things. Could be that they have a resistant production of the antigens which are coming from the COVID. So an exhaustion of the immune system, so they are not getting the disease systemic as you should expect with an infection, but you get continuously have the coping of your own immune system with the not anymore completely existing virus, but the elements of the virus can still be there. So this is exhausting, just the immune system, exhausting you as well again. And it can also be that it's just psychological and people with suffering with chronic diseases thinking that this due to this COVID period. But anyway, you have to deal with it. And you can get a lot of misinformation in such a period. And this misinformation you have to discuss. And therefore you should also be anticipated whenever such a thing happens again. That your information management after an outbreak, man-made or natural outbreak, is done in the proper way. You get always misinformation. People who think it's funny to do it, people who want to misuse it as to get power, like in Africa, what I already mentioned, that people from Medicine Sans Frontières and Doctors Without Borders were killed because some leaders thought they were bringing the disease instead of stopping the disease, helping the people. We had a discussion after Fukushima whether tuna is safe, whether there's radiological activity in the sea. No. When we know what really happens, then this is a non-discussion. The only fact is that it was not wise to have the generators for electricity under the reactor so low so that it was flooded. But not everybody is hindered by knowledge, and then you get all kinds of rumors and fake news. It goes faster than the serious news, so you get disruption one or the other way. Then you have to educate and inform all persons involved in such incidents how to keep the population well informed in a way it's understandable for everybody. And yeah, it's a science which is still ongoing, but we should also be aware that things like this happen. What for symptoms we see, it's sadness, demoralization, isolation, difficulty of concentration, sleep and appetite disturbances, fatigue already mentioned, headache, skin rashes, general symptoms which could indicate an worked immune system, but also overworked brain systems. In the social media, you get magical thinking about microbes and viruses, fear of invisible agents, fear of contagion, all kind of rumors pop up, and this can be disruptive for society as well. And an enemy, and that's why as a military I discuss this, it can be used to make unrest, to create unrest, and to create a situation where the population says, my government does not function. That's what we have to control as well. One of the aspects of the attacks with invisible chemical or biological weapons. And I already mentioned now the military, that's not new. In 2015, after Ebola, Bill Gates wrote in the New England Journal of Medicine already, there will be another outbreak. And then all countries should identify trained military resources that would be available for epidemics. In a severe epidemic, the military force might to work together. And NATO have a role in this. This is also why they educate the joint NATO Joint Cyber and Defense Center of Excellence. That NATO has also a role to help in the upscaling of the response from public health towards a known or unknown natural or man-made biological incidents. And Bill Gates wrote it already in 2015. Yeah, and the military should help, because in 2001, Oxford already wrote that they are not really compatible. The military have their strengths: flexibility, mobility, protection, give guns, safe haven, we have good communication, we have an intel organization who knows a lot, sometimes does not share healthcare issues, comes to the public health systems, but there is not really a route, and we are constructing it now that health issues are communicated with public health departments, so they can spread it to the hospitals. But this route is not, in the Netherlands, not fluid yet. We have good logistics, medical support, mobile hospital, standard of care. But yeah, relatively short deployments. My wife wants me to see more often than with NGOs. NGOs stay sometimes for years, 2-3 years in Africa, and come then back home. Intercultural incompetence, I do not think so, but that we think in Oxford. And cooperation, communication with civilian actors is sometimes difficult because you are armed forces, you are weaponized. And by definition, no neutrality or impartiality, you can act in a neutral way or impartial, but I serve the Queen, King of my country, or you are serving your nation. So it is not completely neutral. Competition with NGOs, which is not really the case. Medical treatment standards already discussed. The military are going more for triage, and with general practitioners normally go first patient in, second patient in, and then out. So there's a kind of battle space, sometimes not really seen in the right way. This is not how we do our humanitarian aid. Oxford with guns was mentioned in parliament in UK, there's an overlap. And this overlap will be bigger. And this German military doctor is not helping the little child, but is also training the local doctor over there. And this is also not really what we want. With the Ebola, there was this kind of announcement. The US had one hospital and China built two hospitals. Yes, but the US gave, and the West gave more direct help, more hands to the patient. And China was typically building huge buildings as Ministry of Health, huge buildings, hospitals, and that's visible forever. Strategic, smart in that way, effective is different. NGOs and military need each other far more. There's a civil military interaction and also more cooperation, and this comes more close together. And what military can do in a civilian issue, mostly in regions where there's an armed conflict, it's described in the Oslo Convention. Oslo Convention is known. It's a UN document where the military support to civilian humanitarian intervention is described. And in this UN organization, again, I'm not actually behind, we have a cluster organization. So the UN, which was most often a disastrous organization with a lot of peacocks doing things and quarreling with each other, is now far more structured in the UN under the management of humanitarian and emergency relief coordinator. And then you see that logistics is on the World Food Program, that you have health under the WHO, that World Food Program is also doing the telecom and communication. UNHCR is doing the protection, and this has a meeting which we call cluster meeting in regions where humanitarian aid is provided, mostly in developing countries, so also the meetings are in an improvised situation. The military are not in here, but mostly when the Dutch have their intervention, they are as observer over here, they are present. Because the presence is of importance, because in the Oslo Convention, you know that the rich truck cookie principle is valid. And rich truck cookie principle is that when we have a peaceful intervention for humanitarian aid, then the military can have direct assistance to the humanitarian task and indirect and infrastructure as well. But when you have peacekeeping, peace enforcement or combat, the role of the military is less dominant because of the fact that it could worsen the peaceful situation over there. There are a lot of maybes. Infrastructure, yeah, that's a maybe in combat because it might happen that because we are present at this cluster meeting, that we build a bridge at a certain point where the humanitarian aid organization certainly can use it to provide food in an area which was otherwise not accessible. The military also brought lab capacity in the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. This is a military doctor now civilian clothes, a little bit doubtful, but in humanitarian aid, you can accept this because the German armed forces had these containerized laboratories which you can put on a pickup truck and bring into Africa, in contrast to these American Dutch, which are all over. They are still on the Cape in Monrovia because they cannot go inside the country. And you see that the laboratories are also in places inside the country. it makes sense to have those laboratories, and that is was natural outbreak. But also when you have an incidental, no, a man-made outbreak, to check whether it is really a patient or not. All the patients which were referred to the clinic for Ebola, only 27% really had Ebola. 41% was Ebola negative, malaria negative, probably they had Lassa fever. 32% was Ebola negative, but had malaria. Why is this important, this screening? Well, when you bring them all together in the Ebola treatment clinic, 3/4, almost 75%, will get Ebola in the clinic, and that's not what you want. So this kind of pre-screening, this laboratory facility, is very important. And with new technologies, this is the test box, but also with new technologies like PCR, which is also fieldable, you can have good results. In such this laboratory was in a clinic of medicine sans frontières. They had a good routing to prevent infection from suspects by confirmed patients. So this was well done to know, but also good to know that it's not an airborne disease. So you can have this kind of open, you call it, get the time, open gates between the lanes where they both go, because when you are confirmed and you are going back a black sheet of foil, that it's doubtful. That doesn't give you the right mood. So for giving the right mood to have, yeah, rest in the population you are going to check, it's important that everybody can see each other and knows what is happening. The military have already a long tradition in giving medical care, but that was in the past different from now. The French had a lot of medical posts in Africa just to control the population, to have better insight what is happening in their colonies at that time. And now it's more that this aid giving support to population in need. And we have now some more NGOs involved, more cooperation with the NGOs, and the Interagency Standing Committee, EASIC, is one of those coordinators in this aid, where you have outbreaks of diseases which you want to limit as much as possible. And why do we want to limit these outbreaks? Well, simple. It costs more to control an outbreak than to prevent it. The outbreaks from recent epidemics or zoonotic were enormous cost. The SARS from 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, 2003 it was, had cost of 50 billion. Food and mouth disease in the UK, I already mentioned this, because about the outbreak from the plant to produce the vaccines, and the other outbreaks, lots of cost. And we will take the cost of COVID-19, this room would not be big enough to give the cost of this in this plan. So that's the reason why it's important to have a surveillance of disease abnormalities in the world. Neglected dimension of global security. For this, financials are present. even after US aid and other US facilities are now limited due to the new administration in the USA. But we are still saving Gavi for vaccines. World Bank is giving a lot of money. There's WHO is doing things. So for prevention, Gavi and KSHA have funds to support countries in this. Catching WHO with its reference labs and DHSA for the G7 nations. Support a lot of people, a lot of organizations are in response and some of them in recovery. Again, you see, most of them are in response. You know why? That's also the reason why an NGO, when it helps for a humanitarian disaster between the capital and the airport, the military will always go outside because then we do not see the press. But the NGOs want to see the press, and that's the reason they are in between the airport and the capital, because all press is passing it, and then they can show what work they are doing, and they get funding from institutes and countries. So then visibility is essential. And that's also why there is more money available for response than for prevention, unfortunately. This is the German mobile lab, which I already mentioned. And when you paint it orange, it's acceptable for medicines on chair to use it. Yeah, that's also publicity. This is also publicity, and I don't want to see this. What we will see, what we want to see is treatment areas like in a parking lot over here, where you can treat a lot of patients at the same moment, and you are prepared for outbreaks whenever they occur. Yeah, after COVID-19, the Americans have thick reports, and we will be prepared. Kate Bingham in the UK said there will be another nasty virus, but next time Britain will be ready. Well, we'll see. And yeah, the medical triage, I already mentioned. You know the triage principle? Yeah? Okay, then I'll skip this one because it takes some time. But in fact, it is that you are giving the most support to those where you can do with less effort in recovery. Time is critical in this, even in a contaminated environment. And there we have a dilemma again, because on one hand you want to be fast, on the other hand you do not want to create more danger. So the first hour is of importance, and it depends on what kind of incident you have at that moment, what you are going to do. This is an incident management for the first responders, that in general, but for biologics and biological toxins. Important, when you have only one casualty, you can use normal procedures, like Kim Jong-nam, who was with a nerve agent. He was attacked by a woman from Indonesia with, probably she didn't know what she was doing, but she put the nerve agent in front of his nose and he didn't survive. The woman survived, so it's very local. And then, of course, with PPE, you transport the patients, but in fact, after cleaning and having a sample for forensic use, it is not dangerous anymore. I was even amazed that the press was allowed to quite quickly after the incident go to the place to make pictures of the place. I think you should keep it a little bit longer in the installation, but that was quickly done. 2 casualties, more caution, And when you have 3 casualties or more, then there might be a real CBRN incident where you can have afterwards more patients, and then you are going for the real CBRN approach technologies, and where you are doing the insulation, the mass decontamination, and so on. You have the merits and the hard teams, response incident teams and hard teams, the hazardous area response teams. Normal procedures in disaster management, the policemen and the fire brigade representatives probably are known about this, but what my message in this is keep them identified. So having a different PPE, having a different signs on their clothes, so that you know what you can expect from somebody. Because a heart and a merit team member is different in the education. And so in your disaster management, it's important to have this well identified. Yeah, and what you are doing in the response is to recognize what's happening, avoid further spread of the pathogen, and isolate. This is the picture of the situation in Salisbury, where they had perfect isolation and identification system. I think this was a good exercise for the first responders. The good thing over here was that they really quickly diagnosed what it was, but that was because there was a medical doctor in the hospital who was aware of nerve agents, because he had also some contacts with the military DSTL research institutes. And yeah, general practitioners should be aware of something which is uncommon and identify what is happening. And when you see these pupils of the eyes getting smaller, you see that there's a nerve defect, then from a situation you should consider a nerve agent as well. Although I hope 99% of the doctors never will see such a case. Still happens, food poisoning in a food mall to affect elections in the US. It happens. The anthrax lab. So be aware. Whenever there's an infection patient sample, also, and I cannot stress it more, have proper packages. In Africa, when I was there after the Ebola outbreak, I have seen so many broken bottles or imperfect packed samples. It was terrible. It happens. So be prepared, and that's also preparation for a country to have the disposables for proper packaging of samples of high infectious diseases in place, have it in stock. Like you have PPE in stock. So, important aspect, do not underestimate. Now, toxins which can be produced by criminals. This is something like the police thing. There's an aberrant in the ricin, from the ricin, of course, the gospel bean. Like pesticides are well known. In France, it was detected, and with simple materials they could do it. And you can find it on the internet how to do it. On one hand, in the Poisonous Handbook, it's the original publication. It's also appeared in the Al Qaeda manual, which was also available on the internet. How do you detect whenever this is there? When somebody has made this lysine, Well, there are all kind of handheld detectors for it. Then you have biologics. The RNA, DNA sequence is of importance to detect the pathogenicity islands. Bioman is one of the modern instruments. Biofire is a modern instrument. And in military response, those are mostly now available. In military response, we also have still the field laboratories, sometimes used in the test pits. This field laboratory is not very practical. I prefer to use an instrument like the RIPS. It's an American instrument designed by Mattel, made by the armed forces in the US, and also available for European NATO members, and some other countries have this also available. I have to be still responsible for this instrument in European countries when it is used, because it's not a commercial available instrument, but just made available by American Armed Forces as it is designed by a contractor of the American Armed Forces. The sample is detected and measured by Raman spectroscopy. Spectroscopy. So whenever there is something weird, it is sampled, it goes on the tape like the old tape recorder, and then it can be used afterwards for forensic proof and also for further identification with such a bioman or biofire. So the PCR is still possible after it has detected something which is different from the normal. The test strips are perfect in detecting its own control material, but unfortunately the real material is less detected with the test strips. So yeah, they're very expensive. I do not really support it. This is an air sample, and this is an instrument which is a kind of flow cytometer, and the flow cytometer identifies particles by fluorescence, side and forward scatter, and whenever something is different from normal, it detects. This instrument is not only used in public health or in the military, but also used for the farmers. Farmers in the big stables with rabbits or with chicken, they use it to detect in an early phase the potential outbreaks in their stables. For triggering and detection, there are also instruments. You can use the fluorescence, ultraviolet. This is the flow cytometer I already mentioned. Flame spectroscopy is used. And this is a European project from Poland, together with France and Hungary. Holoscan, I'm the scientific advisory board of this project, where with a microscope with holographic lenses, so you see the rings around the objects. You are just looking whether there are particles in the air which are not normal. And when it is not normal, it's isolated and it can be going for further PCR or lamp detection. And I already mentioned this detection, which is after such a rapes identification. And this is the new Bio Watch program in the US. Bio Watch program 1 was not always successful because it gave some false positives, which were, not popular because it gave a lot of disruption and unnecessary cost. And therefore, there's more attention now to prevent false positives. And therefore, the gene amplification is introduced, and LAMP technology is the method of preference for the BioWatch program 2. PCR under it, but LAMP is more specific and is faster as well. And that is a gene amplification which runs at one temperature. With PCR, you have to change temperature. ELISA is seen as a little bit outdated now. And the test strips, yeah, well, they are over here, they are rapid, but very low sensitivity. How to act, isolate, the French have also a training program, how to do the execution, but you will have training in the field, how to act, so then you will see this in practice. One of the important things is when you are bringing out of the place of incident the patients, you have to clean the face, disinfect the face first before you put on a mask, also to prevent that bugs are coming when the mask is taken off. You can have an insulated or a foil in your ambulance, but it's to prefer to have before around your patient when you are evacuating infected patients. In Africa, at the Ebola, we did it this way because it was not an airborne, but in this case, you're not sure, so you have to be more careful. And also, in a diseased person, especially in areas where incineration of the body is not accepted, you have to take care that the funeral is taken care in the right way, so that the pathogens on the body are not infecting. In some countries, it's not allowed to do incineration of the body, so you have to bury. Also, some countries have traditions where they kiss and wash the body before it is buried. And when you have a person who is diseased by Ebola, as an example, you cannot kiss, you cannot wash the body because then you will be infected yourself. In Africa, especially in Liberia, we should found a solution by inventing, in fact, by the University of Lyon, new traditions which give the honor to the deceased person, but still there was no judgment. And there were also designed rituals which gave the honor without judging the patient. And the burying was done in Disco Hill, that was near Monrovia, and that was a hill which gave two features. One, you could dig deep enough so that it was not possible that the body pieces come too high so that animals could eat the body, and also not too deep because the straw water was at a hill, of course, but lower, so that also the soil, the water in the soil was not coming in contact with their body. So also things you have to consider, especially in regions where it's less developed and you have to take care more about the deaths. I think, and that's also a message I would like to give at the end of this presentation, that trained military reservists are very essential in CBRN response, because they know the civilian side of it, they know the military side of it, and they can be the junction to get these cultures together and also to make the military procedures effective in the civilian world and the other way around. And with this, you can create a very resilient community to be aware where you can get or create or prevent infections. And there's a whole plan. I can give a complete lecture on this only on bioresilience. But with the knowledge I have given to you, I hope you will be able to give input in these kind of bioresilience plans, which we should have now in different countries. And this took 4:45, I think good timing. It ends my presentation, and I'm now open for questions again. Other questions? Or you are now exhausted? Please, all questions. Clear? Also silence?